Okay, great. And we are live.
Welcome, everybody. I'm not sure who's here. I can't see. But my name is Daniel McDonough, and I'm an artist in residence and a professor here at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I make my living as a teacher and also as a member of the Jupiter String Quartet. My quartet is based here, and all four of us are the ensemble in residence here at the University of Illinois. I'm happy to be with you this afternoon, and I asked the Cello Bello folks if I could just keep this very open-ended. I didn't really feel like preparing a lecture, but on a particular topic. But I just love to hear your questions and do my best to answer them. So please feel free to enter them into the chat. Anything you're wondering about. Happy to talk about chamber music, string quartets. Happy to talk about cello stuff, or whatever else is on your minds. So the first question just came in from Robbie. He says, "Hello, I'm a first-year conservatory cello student. How do we begin creating an artistic personality and style? What if we feel like we are unable to develop this style quicker than other students?" That's a wonderful question, Robbie, and I know that can be, it can feel intimidating to not know how to discover your own voice and to feel like um, you don't have it as well as others might. But I think that's probably a misperception on your part. Everybody's unique, and everybody's going to find their voice on the cello. I think I encourage my students to um, take in as much as they can from the great masters on the cello, but also from all types of music that they're inspired by. Vocal music in particular, but symphonic music, chamber music. I think a lot of times, and I had this own kind of misconception when I was a student. I thought, well, if I go and I listen to how Rostropovich plays the Shostakovich Sonata, or if I go listen to Feuermann's Beethoven sonatas, I'm just going to sound like they sound. And I remember having a lesson where I went in to play for Tim Eddy, actually, and then I was playing one of the Beethoven sonatas, and he sort of looked at me. He was like, "Have you ever heard this piece before?" And I thought, "Oh no, what have I done?" And it, I think that you're never gonna be Feuermann. You're never gonna be Rostropovich, but you can learn so much from listening to these folks. And the more you take in, the more you learn sort of what feels right to you, and what you want to take and make a part of your voice. And eventually your voice will develop. And I would be as patient as you can be. Don't worry about finding it right away. I think it's actually a lifelong process, really. I feel like my voice is still changing. I mean, it's become more and more sort of my own over time, but I'm constantly still exploring like how I want to be as a cellist, what I want to say. So I guess my short answer is I would encourage you to just take in as much as you can, and let it kind of marinate as part of your personality. What you'll learn from it, you might not even have to identify at first, as long as you're kind of digesting it all. Another question from John Gaskins. "Hello, thank you for your time. Do you have any advice for bow articulation in the Bach Fifth Suite Sarabande to achieve the color it needs?" Wow, I'm not sure if I can answer that without hearing you play it, because I'd like to know, John, what color you want it to have. I think this is one of the most beautiful movements, particularly because it's so spare, right? I think it's important in that movement, John, to treat the slurs as articulation markings, right? So we're thinking of the first beat of the bar as having a little bit of spoken quality, and then taking care of the legato through the 4/8 notes that follow. And I would try to be really creative about how you vary that articulation, actually. So I'm not sure, John, what your problem specifically is, if you're having trouble sort of controlling the articulations, if you're getting too much, too little, or if you're just wondering how to articulate. But maybe if you'd like to specify in the chat, I'll come back to your question. Peter says, what advice can you give to young quartets in terms of rehearsal efficiency and making decisions on musical ideas? Well, that's a big question, Peter, and one that we've thought about a lot. We have some principles that we try to adhere to in our quartet, and that is that there's no wrong idea. There's no idea that's inherently incorrect or better than any other idea on its face, right? So that could be maybe feel pretty inefficient to you to have 4 different ideas about a passage, but I think it's worth your rehearsal time to consider each idea, and it might also be worth your rehearsal time not to feel like pressure to make a decision about one idea over another idea, right? So we have a rule that we try all the ideas, we try to make them our own when we try them, and then we'll discuss, and maybe it will become clear that this is the way to do it, it feels right. Maybe it won't. Maybe somebody else's idea will sort of gradually work its way into your own idea until you've got a kind of wonderful mix of ideas happening. I feel like we spend less time now making firm decisions and more time kind of experimenting and trying things and letting them marinate for a day or two and coming back to it. That doesn't answer the efficiency question. That can be hard, but I think it's worth the patience to not feel like you have to kind of nail down a certain way right away. We don't actually really vote in our quartet. We just talk. And usually you can get a sense, like if the other 3 members seem to like a certain way, then you just sort of back away and say, okay, let's try it that way. But mostly it's just dialogue, I would say. And you can learn from trying other people's ideas with a kind of open heart. That's a big topic. I could probably talk about that topic for an hour. I hope that was helpful. Christian asks, hello, any advice for a student who has complained of over-practicing Haydn D major first movement? How can he go deeper, changing perspectives away from mastering the technical demands? That's a really great question, Christian. It's hard to know without knowing your student really well and sort of what their personality is. But certainly I'm sympathetic to this feeling of having practiced something to death and having lost a kind of inspiration in the piece. I think it can be useful, and this is something that was taught to me, but I've also tried to pass on to my students, is to really take a moment and identify very specifically what it is you love about this piece, right? You practice it, 2 hours a day for 6 months, and you feel like you forget why it's so beautiful. But to actually sit down and admire the piece without the cello, right? To kind of talk through, or even sing through, more importantly, what it is that you think makes this piece still one of the great cello concertos that we have. Why is it still around, right? And then to figure out a sort of related component is to figure out how to think of it technically through a musical lens. I think one of the things that I'm always trying to do when I teach is integrate the musicianship with the technique, so that when we're practicing the technique and we're banging our head against the wall about playing in tune, that it's never sort of isolated or divorced from from the musical side of things, that it's always somehow attached to the character of the pulse or the quality of the sound, so that you're never just thinking about technique in a void. I don't know if that answers your question, Christian. One of the hard things about this is that there's no follow-up questions. So please feel free to enter something back in the chat if you want to have more of a back and forth about it. I'm trying to keep up. Hey, Max, how's it going? Question from Max. In what ways does playing professionally in a string quartet affect the way you play and practice individually? Well, one of the things that I think is so important for cellists and string players generally about playing chamber music is that it's an opportunity for us to learn to listen harmonically. It's like a chance. We spend so much time sort of playing single lines in our practice rooms. And unlike a pianist who brings the harmonies with them when they practice, chamber music, string quartets, gives you an opportunity to kind of train your ears to hear that way, right? To hear the verticality of something instead of just thinking horizontally. So I guess my answer, Max, is that it's helped me kind of practice in a way where I'm thinking a little bit more with more complexity about how my single line relates to what's going on around it. So that's true when I practice my quartet music. Of course, I'm sort of trying to hear what my colleagues would normally be doing. But if I'm practicing Haydn D major concerto, for example, I try to think about what's happening in the orchestra part, right? I'm trying to think harmonically. I'm trying to think about the character of the rhythm that's supporting my line. So maybe that's something that has come out of being a professional string quartet cellist. There are surely other things, but that's the first thing I think that comes to mind. And it's one of the reasons that I am encouraging my students to play as much chamber music as possible, because I think that's the thing that they learn quickly from that kind of chamber music experience. That's the thing that they can sort of take from their chamber music rehearsals and apply to their cello playing. Another question, how do you explain sautier bowing to a student? Well, when I'm teaching a kind of off the string or bouncing stroke, I oftentimes will make sure that the student knows that it should feel like they're not trying to pick the bow up off the cello. I think it's very important that you start the feeling in the string and you allow the stick to kind of do what it's designed to do. You know, it's this wonderful feat of engineering that can really make articulations and quick articulations and bounces for you just because of the way it's designed. So I think there's a common problem that I see is that people are sort of up in their shoulders and they're trying to bounce the bow, where I think you should really feel like the bow is doing that work for you. Like your job is to actually engage the spring in the bow by putting weight down, right? And then the upward spring is taken care of by the stick, right? For the natural tension on the stick and the hair. So like when I do a quick stroke like that, I really feel like my job is to work at going down into the cello, not side to side, but really sort of this way to get the bow bouncing. It's like I often use an analogy of like a basketball. It's like you want to try to not bounce every single time, but you want to do big bounces and let the other bounces sort of happen naturally. So I really am encouraging my students to use rhythms. I don't know if you can see, but I'm really trying to accent sort of one out of every four notes. Like if you had 4/16ths, you're really pulsing the beats, and you're not trying to pulse every single 16th. And then the other thing is I look for ways to teach my students to like feel the sensation of getting certain notes for free, like where they're not really working on them. So you would start by really feeling that up bow stroke as being a reaction to the down bow. So it's like my job is just to initiate the down bow stroke this way, and then the hand springs back up, and I really don't feel like that's any effort on my part, right? So what I'm really doing is I'm also feeling both sides of the string. So I start on the left side of my G string. I'm playing a D here on my G string. I start on the left side of my string, and I throw the bow towards the right side of the string. So I'm really sort of rotating around this axis in the string. And the up bow is sort of happening naturally. I feel pretty weighty in my first finger. I feel like I can feel the spring of the hair on the stick. And then I can try to get a few more things for free. And I'm doing 4 notes. But I really only feel like I'm working on the first one. Right, so that's the way that I sort of try to teach people to get that ease in that style of bowing. I hope that's helpful. There are other ways, but that's probably the most efficient way to talk about it right now. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all these. Lana asks, could you please explain your process of preparation for chamber music competitions? And do you have any advice for emerging quartets? Competitions are hard. I mean, we had many moments in our early days where we were quite discouraged. We weren't successful. Earl Carless, who was the longtime second violinist of the Juilliard Quartet, he really encouraged us, and this stuck with me, to think of them not to allow yourself to really get too bothered by the result. He said, they're like a lottery. That was his expression. And we tried to prepare as best we could, and we tried to treat it like a performance. I think maybe that's the best advice I could give you, is we didn't try to play to any particular judge based on what we knew about their own playing or what we thought they might like. We didn't try to speculate about how we should play based on who was on the panel, but we did try to communicate like we would in a concert. We tried to really treat the competition like our job was to move people or communicate with people, rather than our job was to try to impress people. And I think that's important not only in competitions but in recitals too, because I think oftentimes we think we're going to get judged, and that's what makes performing hard, right? We feel like, oh, there are people in the audience that are judging me, right? So the more you can get out of that critical part of your monkey brain, the more you can think about the positive aspects of performance, and hopefully find the positive aspects of competitions, which are quite difficult. I don't particularly like them myself. And there are some competitions that allow for this to happen more easily. Like the Banff competition was wonderful because we played complete pieces. It felt like real performances. There was an audience in addition to the judges, right? So I think it's nice if you can find competitions where you feel like there are people other than the judges that are listening to you, and you can kind of play to those people. That's, I guess, maybe what I would say about it, other than work really, really hard. I mean, it takes a lot of time for an emerging quartet to kind of find each other in terms of sound and pulse and comfort on stage together. And I would take your time, I guess. That's what I'd advise you to do. How did you form your quartet? Hi, Maruna. We formed our quartet in graduate school. I was studying in New York for a master's degree, and my three colleagues, who I'm still playing with 20 years later, Nelson, Meg, and Liz, had moved to Boston. But we knew each other from summer festivals. We sort of met in various forms in Cleveland, but also in Taos. And they were moving to Boston, and we decided that we wanted to give it a shot to start a quartet. So we took the Chinatown Express, which at that time was like $5 a ride from Chinatown in New York to Chinatown in Boston. And it was a really terrible, I mean, you got what you paid for. You had to bring like a headlamp so you could read. You had your luggage in the aisle, so if there was a fire, there was no way to escape this bus. I mean, it was totally, the code was not there. There was this dangerous situation. I remember one time we were like approaching Boston, and the coach took the wrong exit, and then the driver decided that the best move was just to pull on the shoulder and back up on the highway in this giant bus so that he could get going the right way. Anyway, we sacrificed a little bit early on. It was long weekends in Boston or New York to kind of start rehearsing. We would play for whoever would be willing to hear us. And then eventually I moved to Boston, and we were able to enroll with Paul Katz in the professional string quartet development program there at NEC. So we were very lucky, and we were very committed to each other. But it was not always easy, but totally worth it. Okay, I gotta move forward. Any tips you have with recording oneself as a practice tool? When I listen to myself recorded, I'm so shocked how poor my intonation actually is compared with what I think I hear when I'm playing. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad you're recording yourself though, because I don't think the recording lies about intonation. Sometimes I think it doesn't give a totally accurate portrayal of the quality of the sound or the dynamic range of the sound, but I think you want to get yourself to a place where you can hear the intonation in real time. And I think a lot of times I find that students, they've got so much going on, they're thinking about so many things that it's hard for them to hear in the moment what's happening, right? So recording yourself is a wonderful way to allow your ears to really focus on what just happened, right? So you don't have so much information going into your brain. Eventually you can get to a place while you play where you don't have to think about all of that stuff all the time. And you can kind of get into a state of mind where you're just really listening and reacting to what you hear. And I also think for intonation, it's very important that you be able to hear before you play, right? I think you can't play in tune unless you can really specifically hear the pitch that you want, right? That combined with having a kind of facile technique where you're not tight, so that your muscles are able to connect with your ears in a way that is natural and doesn't feel like your ear can give direction to your hands without your muscles getting in the way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I think it's like a two-pronged solution, right? It starts with your ear and your imagination and making sure that you know exactly what kind of F sharp you want. Or, I think when we think about that, it's very important that we realize that the choice of our note and the color of the sound and the kind of shading of the intonation, if you challenge your ear to hear that specifically, your ear will get stronger, right? Don't just take any generic G. Like take a really specific G and see if you can match it. And then see if you can get to it from whatever note you're coming from before in a relaxed, efficient way with your body. But keep recording yourself, because I think that's really important for you to be able to realize, okay, this is what I actually sound like. Now I need to hear that in real time. I need to train myself to hear that in real time. And then I need to train myself to hear it ahead of time, right? I need to anticipate what note I want and make sure that it matches what I want. I hope that helps. Question from our YouTube live audience. What happens in your head when learning pop or etudes? What are you thinking when studying one for the first time? Well, one thing that I'd like to impart with regards to that is that I think you should treat them like real music. Like, I think you should, when you're learning it, you shouldn't just approach it from a technical standpoint. I think it's important that you identify sort of what the etude is helping you to master in your technique. But I also think that you shouldn't, again, separate that technique from music, right? So these aren't the greatest pieces of music. I mean, they're wonderful cello etudes, but musically they're not outstanding. But let's try to make them sound that way. So let's think about the phrasing. Let's think about kind of the beauty of the sound, the legato of the bow, whatever it is that makes it feel more like music for you, will be an important part. Because, like, later on when you're trying to play octaves in Dvorak concerto or whatever, if you've only learned your octaves in a kind of sterile environment, it's not as helpful when you get to your Dvorak concerto. Like, how can you learn your double stops in Popper in a musical way, right? How can you feel musical about your technique so that when you apply it to great music, there's a connection there. You've built a kind of bond between the music and the technique. I'm not sure that answers your question, but I hope it does. I guess when you're asking when I'm studying it for the first time, and I would say from the outset, think about what you want to say, how you want to shape. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Don't start with just dry technique and add the music in later. I don't believe in that. Here's another question. Hey, thanks so much for your time. Any tips on a debut string quartet program? My string quartet's comprised of Royal College of Music graduates, and all of us are experienced and capable. We're just trying to plan our first tours. Do you think a mix of Haydn, Shostakovich, Schubert, and Fasel would be a good program for a tour, or should we switch it up? Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't know. I mean, those are all great. That sounds wonderful. If it's your first tour, I would take music that you feel super comfortable with, music that you've been playing since the beginning of your quartet. I mean, I can think of 100 wonderful programs. And one of the great things about string quartets is how much wonderful repertoire we have. And I'm glad to see that you have new music in there too. I think that's very important. I'm afraid I can't really advise on that. I don't even know which Haydn, which Shostakovich, and which Schubert you're talking about. So I wish you luck. This is, hey Roland, how's it going? What is the most inspiring solo piece you've ever played? Oh gosh, I mean, how could I choose? I mean, I feel like Bach is the thing I'm constantly turning back to. It seems like it never gets stale. It always challenges me. It's always moving when I play it. So I guess my answer would be Bach, and I couldn't even choose from the 6 suites. But those pieces, I think, especially because I can play them and I can do it at 11 p.m. at night. I don't need a pianist, and I'm so grateful for that music. Question from my niece. Wants to know if cello strings have the same names as violin strings. Well, great question, Rose. Cello strings are almost the same as violin. They're lower. We have an A string. You have an E string. Thank you for your question, sweetheart. Hey, Jordan. What has helped you stay inspired these days without being able to play concerts for live audiences? Well, we've been making recordings, and we've been very lucky because we've had concert presenters ask us to create digital content that they release for their audiences in lieu of these performances that we would have been traveling to. So we feel really fortunate. And I was really skeptical at first, like a year ago, March, when this all started. I was thinking to myself, well, I don't want to just make videos, but then I found that it was so essential for me, and I hope it's been good for listeners, just to still make music. And we've treated ours like live concerts. We do everything in one take, and it's not perfect, but we play in a hall. There are cameras that record us, and I found myself kind of moved by just the idea that this is going to be shared with people. So I guess I've surprised myself that I've been willing to be open to this kind of music making, but I'm eager for the real thing to come back. But for you all, I think this is an opportunity to think about music in service a little bit. You know, I mean, a lot of us are not making money playing concerts right now. I think it's been a nice chance for us to think about the importance of music in people's lives, and how we can, even if we're not being paid to do so at the moment, how we can kind of give to people through music right now, because people need it, I think, more than ever. And I experienced this firsthand when I was a student in New York in 2001. I was at Juilliard when 9/11 happened, and that was like a really intense week for a lot of people, especially people living in New York. And some of the most moving concerts I ever saw were that week. You know, free concerts put on by people, impromptu things, and that stuck with me. And I had a lot of really good conversations with my teacher about sort of whether music was important. I was like, because I was thinking at that moment, like, well, maybe I should just do something else. Like, why am I being a cellist? You know. And it was moments like that where I thought, well, I feel like it is essential, and we have something to give in moments like this. Hey, Ryan, I hope you're staying warm. Do you have any favorite chamber music when working with young musicians? Well, Ryan, it depends on how young and what level. I mean, it's really hard to know without knowing the specifics of your group. If they're advanced enough, I think Shostakovich quartets can get students pretty excited. It's pretty visceral. It's pretty angsty. The first quartet is pretty manageable, but of course, like the third and the eighth and the seventh is short and manageable. Those are pretty devastating pieces and easy to kind of connect to emotionally, which I think is important for anyone, but for young students especially. So I've found if they can manage it, that those pieces can get students pretty excited about chamber music. I think a lot of it, Ryan, depends on like what's possible for them technically at that stage. If you want to come back to the chat and tell me exactly how old they are, I can do my best. But I have this problem too. I'm not always the greatest at picking repertoire that's appropriate for, especially like junior high beginner chamber music players. I mean, that's like an area where I'm constantly failing. So if you discover something, will you email me? Max is back. What advice do you have for warming up scales and such in a chamber music setting? In what ways should you listen for balance, rhythmic accuracy, pitch? Well, you should definitely listen for all those things. I think that I remember, and this stuck with me, that Joel Krosnick came to Yellow Barn. Joel Krosnick is a longtime cellist of the Juilliard Quartet, former cellist of the Juilliard Quartet. And he said scales are not for warming up. He's like, warming up is like, do a jumping jack, stretch a little bit. And he was being a little bit facetious probably, and I know we think of scales as like getting ready to play our concerto, but I think it's important to think of scales as like the building blocks of our musicianship. So again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but I think you should try to play them, Max, like as beautifully as you can. Like when I play my scales, I'm listening for intonation, I'm listening for rhythm, but I'm also paying so much attention to like the connections that I'm making between the notes, the sound, and I'm working in my scales on like how I develop sound, how I can change the sound across bow changes, all the things that help me phrase better in my my repertoire. So I guess I guess I'm not really answering your question directly. Maybe, oh, you're saying in a chamber setting. Oh, sorry, Max. Yeah. So the same thing happens with a string quartet. Like if you want to play scales with your string quartet or with your chamber ensemble, you can use them for developing group sound. Like some ways that we've done and I've taught to students is to play, triads together. You could also start in successive thirds. So the cello starts and plays two notes, and then the viola enters on the tonic, and then 2 notes later, the second violin enters, and you get these very beautiful 7 chords as a quartet, and you can listen to your intonation and your blend that way. But once again, Max, you're sort of working to feel the pulse together when you do scales in a chamber setting, and you're also working to sort of match the bows and feel the bow speeds matching. So like if you're sort of leading each other, you can really work to make those musical connections and with the bow together, which I think is important. I hope that helps. Christian, how important is it to use the same technical concepts between members of a quartet? I don't know exactly what you mean, Christian, in terms of technical concepts. If you mean like how you vibrate and how you think about bow, I think everyone in my quartet sort of came from a similar school of private teaching. I mean, we all studied with members of the Cleveland Quartet in our private lessons, in addition to in our quartet coachings. So we were sort of starting from a place with a lot of common denominators. But I guess I would say that doesn't matter that much. If you can communicate your ideas, even if you've sort of learned it from a different language or concept in terms of how you think about it, I think it doesn't really matter. And I think it's important not to tell your colleagues how to do something technically. I think it's important to tell your colleagues how you feel about the music, how you imagine the music, what you'd like it to sound like. and have them figure out how to do that, right? They can come ask you for advice, but I think, and we've made this mistake 1,000 times. Don't sort of just tell your colleague, you really should play that on the D string with the third finger, and you should vibrate, this way with your arm. And I mean, that's their job. I really think that you're better served if you speak about what you want in the music and let them kind of figure it out, or come ask you for tips if they can't figure it out themselves. Elise, she says, haha, thanks so much for answering my earlier question. Different question. What's your preferred Haydn D cadenza? The one that you write, Elise. That's my sort of half-joking answer. I think you should write your own. I honestly think, and I've never done it, so I shouldn't say this probably, but I think that would be the most useful thing for your playing, because you would own it, it would be yours, and you would play it better because you wrote it, and it would be more accurate historically. Hey, Wendy, we're doing well. Thanks for asking. I hope you're doing well too. Jan asks, hello, could you explain what is the role of thumb on vibrato? Is that kind of motor shaking together with fingers and forearm, or more passive, just being relaxed on the cello neck? Is that important? Okay, hold on, Jan. I have to think about that a second. I'm going to say it one more time so I can really understand. She says, could you explain what is the role of the thumb on vibrato? Is that kind of motor shaking together with fingers and forearm, or more passive, just being relaxed on the cello neck? Is it important? Well, I think to answer your last question, it's definitely important to know what the thumb is doing. And I don't think that when I vibrate it, it touches the neck that much, at least for me. Certainly it should never squeeze up on the neck, because that's going to create tension in the hand, and it's going to inhibit downward weight in the cello, right? So if you do touch the neck with your thumb, just make sure that it's very light. But I find that it really is just it just sort of moves with the arm, I guess. Like it doesn't have any job except not to get in the way of the ability of my arm to really shake. And then its other job is to make sure that it balances the fingers well, right? So that as I move from finger to finger, the thumb works to make sure that my hand stays balanced. So I think, like when we first learned to play the cello, we learned that this is first position, and the second finger the thumb goes under the second finger, or something like that. But the more that you sort of the more advanced you are, the more you realize that like first position is really 4 different positions. It's a fourth finger position, a third finger position, a second finger position, and a first finger position. So the thumb's role is to kind of, and it's going to be different for everybody. The thumb's job is just to figure out, where am I least intrusive? Where do I allow the hand to be small, relaxed, supple, so that I can use my vibrato motion comfortably. Does that make sense? So the thumb is a sort of constantly shifting back here in relation to the arm. I hope that helps you. Would you please share a bit on working with Menachem Pressler? Oh my goodness. We played a few concerts with him, and what a beautiful musician. I remember doing Schumann Quintet with him, and we were rehearsing at Juilliard, and he got a phone call in the middle of rehearsal, and it was the news that Bernard Greenhouse had died. So we were with Pressler when he got the news that Greenhouse died, which is like, I can't imagine how intense this must be. And they were colleagues for forever, right, in the Beaux-Arts trio. And my quartet, we all sort of just looked at each other like, oh, what, like this is awful. Like, what do we do? And we said to him, well, shall we just stop and resume tomorrow, or whenever is convenient for you? And he just took a moment, and he went down the hall, and after a while I went and checked on him, and then he just said, you know, the thing to do is to continue to play this beautiful music. You know, that's sort of what he lived for. I feel like he was this chamber music. I mean, that's all he wanted to do, is, you know, was play wonderful chamber music. And he had very strong opinions, but I'm so grateful to have experienced just a little bit of those opinions. He really knew the repertoire and felt strongly about it, and it was really a wonderful way to learn from somebody, was to be able to just collaborate with them, and that was a wonderful wonderful moment for me. Any tips on vibrating on the thumb? Oh gosh, I can't vibrate my thumb, Elise. I'm sorry. I wish I know there are some people that can do it, but I've never been able to do it. Just if I need to have a beautiful vibrato, then I'm choosing a different finger. I mean, I can shake a little bit on it, but it's almost like not worth it. It's like doesn't sound that good. So I guess I'm gonna wish you luck. If you figure out how to make a gorgeous vibrato on your thumb, send me a note and tell me how you did it. I do think it's important, like when you're practicing octaves, at least to practice being able to keep loose, like not even like a really expressive vibrato, but just a kind of like flexible hand, so that you feel like, you know, when you shift, there's a kind of looseness to the hand. That's probably the main place that I think about the thumb being vibrant. But I wouldn't really call it vibrato. I mean, it's just a kind of looseness in the hand. Benjamin says, could you share more about your East Coast Chamber Orchestra? Sure. So the East Coast Chamber Orchestra is a conductorless ensemble that I helped start many moons ago. We were still in school. It was like a kind of utopian idea that we had, where we would kind of make a 18-person string orchestra out of and, you know, with chamber music values, essentially. So it was a lot of fun. I mean, we would spend all day rehearsing in a church in Philadelphia. People would come from, you know, wherever, Boston and New York, and we'd kind of crash on each other's couches and hang out and talk about music, and try to figure out how to rehearse with 18 people. We would take retreats and, you know, just be together and just learn from each other. It was totally disorganized at first, and it was totally inefficient, to go back to somebody's previous question, but it was like a wonderful learning experience. I learned so much from like just sitting next to other cellists in the section, and it was great. And the orchestra is still going. I wish I had more time to do it. I'm going to try to do it this summer, actually, for the first time in a long time. It's a wonderful, it was a wonderful thing. And there actually are a lot of orchestras like that now. I think it's so much fun to play in that kind of ensemble. And there was a lot of energy in that group that I really loved. Question from Paula. How do you provide a better foundation to your chamber ensemble sound as a cellist? I've always struggled with balance, when to play more or less. Any advice? That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important, Paula, that you feel like you're providing that foundation, but you also want to always make sure that you can hear what you want to hear, which I think is all the parts all the time. So you have to sort of learn what that feels like, so that you provide enough support without being without obliterating or distracting from what else is going on around you, what you want the audience to kind of hone in on. I mean, I'm still working on that. I still feel like I sometimes play too loud because I get, excited or something. I mean, I think one of the ways that we rehearse it in the quartet is, if we're not sure, we send somebody out in the hall, especially if we're in a space where we're not used to the acoustic. We send somebody out in the hall to listen back. But in the end, your ears are your best guide. I think you probably should begin to learn to trust your ears a little bit more. I remember asking this question to somebody once. We were playing Mendelssohn Octet. And this is like a famous piece for balance. Like it's very easy to get sort of too much sound going because there's 8 players and it's all wonderful music and you feel excited. And I asked to the first violinist, I said, well, how's the balance? You feel okay? And he just looked at me. He was like, well, can you hear me? And I said, okay, I get it. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like about sort of, if everybody on the team is really listening in the way that you should be and adjusting constantly, then you can do both things, I guess. I hope that's helpful. It seems like a kind of cop-out answer, but I feel like if you listen and you work on your listening, like if you don't accept that listening is just done, like it's like an on and off thing, like, yes, I'm listening, so that's all I have to do. But if you actually accept this idea that you can listen better all the time, that you can become more sensitive to your listening, then there's a way to always improve and use that as a kind of foundational, fundamental thing to kind of guide everything. I don't know. Peter asks, teaching is an integral part of a musician's career. How did you begin and develop your pedagogical skills, and how have they evolved over time? Well, that's a great question. I don't know if I have any skills. They're still evolving, and I'm learning on the fly. I'm learning from my students. I'm learning from Cello Bello. I'm learning from my son's teacher. He's 5. I mean, I'm trying to just take in what I can take in everywhere I can. And you're right that it is an integral part of a musician's career, and it works so wonderfully for me with performance. So, like, I feel like both aspects of my musical life inform each other, and I feel really lucky to have them both. Like the teaching, being able to describe or talk about how I would do a certain thing at the cello or think about a certain phrase, that helps me be a better cellist. And having to perform this music and think about this music helps me be a better teacher. So I think my attitude about it is that I'm never going to be finished figuring out how to be a better teacher. And I'm just trying to take in all I can and see what sticks. Some crazy ideas I have don't work, and some do, and I use them again, and every student is different. And I mean, the main thing that I try to do is I try to give my students the ability to teach themselves, right? The ability to learn how to listen to themselves really deeply so that they can then kind of go on without me. I mean, that's the best skill that I can give them, right? So I'm constantly thinking about that also when I'm teaching. Do you have any personal favorite string quartets to play? Yeah, I have lots. I would say all the late Beethoven quartets. I never get tired of playing these pieces. I find them stimulating emotionally and intellectually, and I find them challenging in a way where I'm always discovering new things in them and feel like I'm never doing them justice. And I mean, they keep me, they just keep me engaged, which I am grateful for. And then the second answer to your question is like maybe cliche, but it's the one I'm currently working on. Unless we've been playing it for 30 concerts in a row, and then maybe it's not my favorite. But I try to I try to be invested in the music that I'm currently playing, as best I can. What's it like working with living composers? Asks Maruna. That's wonderful. I mean, how great to be able to ask the composer of a piece what they actually wanted instead of just guessing and speculating and arguing about it. That's been such a great thing. And also, it's made me realize that a lot of times composers write a certain thing and they don't even like it that much. They're open to what we want and what we think sounds good, and it feels like a real collaboration that way. So it's also a little bit liberating, I guess, to know that there's some flexibility in the music, because I think we spend a lot of time, with our Bärenreiter text scores trying to decipher exactly what Beethoven wanted, and we can never know. And to know that there's a chance that he would have been open and flexible is it can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, although we're still, trying to mine the score for every bit of information we can. I feel like if we don't play his metronome marking, maybe it's okay, maybe he would be okay with it. Derek asks, could you please outline a process of preparation, practicing the contemporary music selection in an audition? How important is contemporary music in one's complete audition? Derek, I'm going to assume that you're talking about like a college audition or a school audition. I'm not exactly sure, but I would say it's getting more and more important. I feel like I never played my contemporary selection when I was auditioning for schools 20 years ago. But I think that the music world is embracing new music more and more. I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think you should take it as seriously as you can. I don't think you should toss it aside like it's not going to be as revealing about what kind of musician you are. If you can show in your contemporary piece who you are as a cellist, I think that's really powerful. So I would almost hope that you get to play it, and I would practice it in a way that you feel proud of your work and ready to play it at any time. In terms of the process of preparation, I think it's music. It's the same as Bach. It's the same as Beethoven. I mean, you have to figure out what you want to say with it. You have to figure out what you think the composer is asking you to say. You have to come to your own point of view about it. And then you have to figure out how to use all these tools that you have at the cello to make it as direct and convincing as you can. It's 3:00. Let me see if I can answer a couple more and then we'll stop. How do you feel about Bach Suite Marathon, 6 suites in 1 or 2 programs? I love to listen to it. I could never do it. I'm happy to be an audience member for that, and I have been, and it's wonderful. Bruno, I'm a 27-year-old who's been in and out of cello practice for the last 11 years. Do you think it's still possible to refine the technique and become a great musician at my age? Yes. Do it, Bruno. It might be harder, but I think you should go for it. We're working on Beethoven Opus 131, C-sharp minor quartet. Oh, what a great piece. Any advice on transitioning between the 7 movements in the piece? That's a great question. I think you should think about a little bit about trying to find some tempo relationship or pulse relationship. And of course, it's going to be slightly flexible or nuanced. But I think if you can keep the sense of time moving through them, it's kind of wonderful. Some are more abrupt than others, maybe, like the scherzo, the way it interrupts. But the ones that emerge out of other ones, I think if you can imagine a pulse, even if you're counting a retard or you're counting a slight accelerando, or if you're feeling the way the pulse connects across, it can be maybe an interesting experiment. See if it works. But I think it's very important that you kind of decide about the character of the silences between them, like how you communicate that space between those movements. It can be very powerful. So, well, it's exciting that you're working on that piece. It's a beautiful, wonderful piece of music. Okay, last 2, I think. Christian, any advice or way to play the second movement of the quartet number 7, Beethoven number 7, beginning with the repeated B flat note? So this is the scherzo of Opus 59, number 1. Any advice? Let's see. I think maybe it's helpful for me if I make sure that I'm not too shy on the first note, even though it's pianissimo. Again, if you're too cautious about the beginning of it, then you don't get a sense of the whole bar feeling in one. You don't get enough swing. It's a wonderfully enigmatic opening. But if you can keep a sense of playfulness in the form and not feel too, it's really hard to do, right? I'm sympathetic. But I think if you approach it in a scared way, then your bow's not gonna kind of react the way you want it to. So maybe, Christian, you could actually practice it slightly over dynamic, just so you feel nice and loose and flexible, and then you can try to maintain that as you get softer. I don't know. I haven't practiced it in a while, but I hope that helps. I mean, I really feel that it's a kind of it springs off the first beat a lot. So if you can find that feeling of one in it, maybe that will help you. I don't know. I really have to see you play it, but that was a shot in the dark. That marks the end of the questions. Okay, says the administrator. Well, it's always a pleasure to do these things. If I didn't give you a good answer or you want more clarification, please reach out to me by email or whatever. I'm happy to try to make it more clear. It's really hard to have a kind of one-way conversation, but these are great questions, and I'm excited that you joined me, and I hope we can do it again. Thank you, everybody.